Hi, this is Dominic Pace, who plays Gekko the Bounty Hunter from The Mandalorian, and you are listening to Star Wars Comics in Canon.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 56. So this week, guys, I am tackling the Age of Resistance Heroes one-shot comics. So these are just one-off stories, each about a specific character. So we've got whole issues about Finn, Poe, Rose and Rey. Then we've got the Age of Resistance special, which features shorter stories about Amilyn Holdo, BB-8 and Maz Kanata. Now, relatively all of these stories take place within 5 years or so of The Force Awakens. So The Force Awakens, in the outside of universe way of doing things, is 34 years after the Battle of Yavin, so 30 years after Return of the Jedi. And these all take place, around 29 ABY to 34 ABY, with the exception of Rey's, which takes place right at the very end of The Force Awakens, just before she shoots off to Ahch-To to find Luke, but I'll get to that when I get there. So all stories in this episode are written by Tom Taylor, except the story about Holdo and the story about BB-8. So the four main comics and then the Maz Kanata story are all written by Tom Taylor. The Finn, Poe, Rose and Rey main stories, they have the artist Ramon Rosanas and the colour artist is Guru EFX. And once again, they're slightly different for the specials, but I'll get to them. Release-wise, the first one of these stories that was released is the Finn story, which was released in July 2019. The last hero story to be released is Rey, which was released September 2019. The trade paperback collection of heroes was released in November 2019, and then the hardcover collection of all of the heroes and all of the villain stories was released in September 2020. And if any of you are Patreon supporters or you follow me on social media, you will see some of the photos I've taken, and I actually own the trade paperback collection of the Heroes comics, so they're the sort of photos that you can see. I also want to mention there is a book called Before the Awakening, and it's got 3 stories for younger readers about Poe, Finn and Rey before The Force Awakens. It was in the Journey to the Force Awakens line, like multimedia project they do whenever a big film comes out, where they release, comics and books and a few other bits and pieces connecting to the upcoming film. And there are references to that story in a lot of these things, but what I always say to people at the start of these Age of stories is that each Age of story is a really good way to get like a little introduction to the character, but a lot of the time they kind of serve as trailers for other content. So the Poe, Finn and Rey ones, they all kind of seem like trailers for the stories of Before the Awakening, and Poe Dameron has got his own comic line, which is written by Charles Soule, which I'll be tackling on this show in months to come. And there's also lots of other little stories, like Amilyn Holdo, for example. She features quite a lot in the Leia Princess of Alderaan book, which is written by Claudia Gray. And Rose Tico is also in the Cobalt Squadron book, which was one of the books as the run-up to The Last Jedi. So there's lots of little bits and pieces around here. Most of these characters were in the Star Wars Allegiance comic, which is a 4-part miniseries I tackled quite early on in the podcast a little while ago. And also there's the book Resistance Reborn, which features a lot of these characters as well, because that serves like between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. So there's also bits and pieces of content that's been released recently that connects to all these stories, but I'm trying to just give you sort of information at the start so I don't have to repeat myself when I go into it. And then when I tackle each individual story, I'm going to give you bios. I've managed to find, I think, the birth years of almost every character in this. So get ready for those, guys. I know how much you love them. I don't know if any of you love them. I just like knowing the ages of characters for some reason. I've got little bits and pieces about each character I'll go through before I start. I'll go through the narrative of the story and I'll confirm any connections through that as well. So let's get started with the first one. And this is going to be Finn's story. So let's give you a bit of information about Finn. So he was born 11 years after the Battle of Yavin, so that is 7 years after Return of the Jedi, which means that he is around 23 years old at The Force Awakens. His call sign when he was a stormtrooper is FN2187. He is Force sensitive, it's seemingly been confirmed in The Rise of Skywalker. He keeps telling Rey that he's going to tell her something, and I interpreted that as he said he was going to love her, but apparently J.J. Abrams has come out and said nope, he was was telling her he can hear the Force, which is alluded to quite a lot in the film, so I don't really understand why he kept saying that to Rey and was waiting until they almost died before he could tell her this thing, but, that's beside the point. He's Force sensitive. He was taken at the age of 3 to get enrolled in the Stormtrooper program. I say enrolled, brainwashed, basically. And also in the holiday special, so the Star Wars Lego holiday special, which is not strictly speaking canon, I've heard people use the term canon adjacent, which means stuff that's in Lego is the general premise is usually fairly close, but the dialogue, the silliness, and lots of sort of little details, that's generally not how it happened. So in this Lego holiday special, it starts off with Finn learning to become a Jedi from Rey. He's trying to wield a lightsaber, he's trying to use the Force and things. So unless other canon content comes out that disputes that, we can assume that Finn is Force sensitive and after Rise of Skywalker actually becomes a Jedi from Rey being his master. It is also worth mentioning that Finn actually has a few connections to other stormtroopers. Now in the book, Before the Awakening, which I mentioned earlier, it actually shows that he has connections with a couple of other troopers. FN-2003, also known as Slip, FN-2199, known as Nines, and there's another one of his friends that doesn't really pop up again, so it's irrelevant here. But the only reason I'm mentioning this is because FN-2003, Slip, he's the one who dies at the start of Force Awakens and wipes his blood on Finn's helmet, and then FN-2199, called Nines, he's the one who yells traitor at Finn when Maz Kanata's castle gets destroyed on Takodana, and he goes against Finn, and when Finn's got his lightsaber, he actually gets beaten by Nines. So it's interesting that he calls him traitor because he actually knows him and they train together. I just thought that was quite a cool little tidbit and things. And Finn has appeared in relatively all sequel trilogy era content after The Force Awakens, unsurprisingly. He shows up in the Allegiance comics, and there's some junior books about him as well, some Star Wars Adventures stuff, so he's a little bit everywhere. So with all that background information said, let's get to it. So his story is called Infestation, and it takes place somewhere within 5 years before The Force Awakens, so it could be 29 ABY or it could literally be 33 ABY, but it's within 4 years of that. So let's begin with the crawl. The Republic maintains peace and order in the galaxy after the fall of the Empire, but the evil First Order, modelled after the old regime, rises in its ashes. And with an untold number of powerful weapons of war and legions of dogmatic stormtroopers at its disposal, the First Order stands poised to overthrow the new galactic government. But there may be one trooper who isn't totally buying what the First Order is selling. So with most of these stories, I'm not going to read out the dialogue, I'm just going to kind of skip over details so you get the vague premise of this, but they're all fairly worth a read, I guess. They're fairly fun, especially if you've got Marvel Unlimited or if they're on Hoopla or anything like that and you can basically get them included in other costs, that's fine, but spending actual full-on money getting the hardcover or the trade paperbacks or even the digital versions, they're not phenomenal. They're not the best Star Wars comics. They're just, they're alright. If you really want to know about these characters, it's cool. I think the one with Rose is arguably the best one. Maybe it's just because she's the character I have the least amount of interest in, so it's surprising out of the 4 of them, but I'll get to that when we cross there. So with Finn's story, it starts off with him mopping up and Kylo Ren and Phasma emerge. Kylo Ren walks past him, but Phasma stops. Phasma gives him and then the other stormtroopers that are with him an assignment. There's a blockage and they need to go down to the bottom levels and clear out the infestation. Finn gets there and there's a few other stormtroopers with him and then there's just some workers nearby. They're trying to work out what it actually is and they say, well, a couple of people have already died, so it's obviously something fairly lethal. They go into the underground parts and there's these strange bat creatures that I haven't really seen before. They just look like giant purple bats, and so, naturally, the stormtroopers start shooting at them and firing at them. There's a really cool panel where a stormtrooper loses his head, which is pretty mental. The trooper captain gets knocked down, and then Finn saves him by grabbing his flamethrower and burning through all the bats that are attacking him, but in doing so, he burns that captain a little bit. Finn then gets put on disposal duty because he annoyed the captain for scorching him slightly. Even though he's got heat-resistant armour, the captain is still not very happy about it. So Finn goes down to the area and he's, trying to clean up some of the damage and whatnot, and he finds a nest. And then he realises that the bats aren't attacking them, it's that they're on Starkiller Base, which is where this is all set, and where they've been mining and cutting out the planet for Starkiller, they've actually come across and interrupted these native creatures. So obviously it's really them who are invading, not the native creatures, they're just trying to defend themselves. So Finn tells the captain about them, says about the bats, says maybe we could try another way and things like that, and the captain just says no and puts him on sanitation duty. So he meets this girl, who she only pops up here, so I'm not going to bother with her name, and he's with her for 3 weeks because this little ship that's the sanitation ship doesn't have hyperdrive because it's just so undervalued, so she just has to make these 3-week-long trips here and there. He seems a bit eager to help her sort of unload and things. He claims he's just bored, and then she suspects something and kind of follows him a little bit, and it shows that he was hiding a lot of the bats in these transport crates. And she finds him, and he's worried he's going to get in trouble, and she says, "Oh, there's these guys again. Yeah, we've been bringing these off-world for ages. We've actually got a specific place that they can live. We've brought loads of them down here." So the comic ends with her showing Finn where these other bats and things live. They release them, and then that's really the end of the story. So it's a nice little story. It just kind of reiterates that Finn is a good person, and that's really it. And that the First Order suck. I mean, that's pretty much what we already knew about, genocidal maniacs who are willing to blow up numerous planets. So yeah, the story's alright, but we'll move on to the next one. So Poe is the one who is up next. Let's give a bit of information about him. He was born to ABY, so he was born between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, about a year before Empire Strikes Back. He's the son of Shara Bey and Poe Dameron. They appear in the Shattered Empire comic, which was a mini-series which I tackled on the 4th episode of Star Wars Comics and Canon. They've also been in other content as well. They're starting to pop up a lot more frequently and whatnot. In the main run of Star Wars Comics that's going on right now, so the second run that started in 2020, they're part of the Pathfinders, which is the group that Kez is a part of, and they're like an elite rebel squadron essentially that they'll just do any crazy job that the rebellion puts to them, and then obviously after the rebellion and whatnot, they then become a part of the resistance. However, Poe Dameron's mum, Shara Bey, she does die before he grows up and whatnot, which I'm not going to get into that here because I will one day be tackling the Poe Dameron comics where it gets into a lot more detail about that. But he has a better relationship with his dad because he's just about, but obviously he misses his mum quite a lot. He was born on Yavin 4, which is where the base is in A New Hope, and after growing up and things, he became a spice runner on Kijimi, which is mentioned in The Rise of Skywalker. Then shortly after that, he goes into the New Republic Navy, and then he defects to the Resistance because the New Republic aren't taking any action against the First Order, who are breaking sanctions put against them. So the First Order are doing all these things that the New Republic told them they couldn't do. The New Republic did nothing about them. So before the First Order truly rose to power because of the lack of the New Republic's conviction, he leaves that and then joins the Resistance, which is something that Leia started. So really, that's the kind of background information you need about Poe. And a little fun bit of trivia is that J.J. Abrams was initially going to kill Poe in The Force Awakens when he crashes the TIE Fighter, but Oscar Isaac begged him not to kill him, so they didn't. Which I quite like, because Poe Dameron is a cool character and I love Oscar Isaac, so it does work. But just thought I'd make that point. So the comic that Poe is set in, this one-shot, is set around 30 to 31 years after the Battle of Yavin. So it's about 3 or 4 years before The Force Awakens, and it's called Fight or Flight. So here's the crawl. Poe Dameron was born to fly among the stars. There's no one better behind the yoke of an X-Wing starfighter, and the young pilot is doing his best to help the New Republic maintain peace in the galaxy after the fall of the evil Empire. But does Poe's destiny truly lie with the Republic? So the comic starts on a New Republic cruiser. An alarm goes off and Poe goes to investigate, and it turns out that someone stole the head of a droid. It turns out it's someone who's quite high up, and it's been recording the last 5 years of everything they've been involved with, meetings and all that sort of stuff. So Poe and the Rapier Squadron all go out to try and find this ship that has just stolen the head of a droid. They manage to find the ship. Poe quickly shoots out its hyperdrive, so it is stuck there. The ship then does some quite intense maneuvers around each of the members of the squadron, and then it heads towards the Lost Souls asteroid field. Poe tells the rest of the squad to pull back while he pursues it, and the sensors and comms don't work once you're inside the asteroid field. There are giant worm things, which one of the characters refers to them as space slugs, which is one of the slang terms that the exogorths are called. Now, the exogorth is that giant worm thing that you see in Empire Strikes Back that the Millennium Falcon inadvertently flies into and then obviously has to fly out and make a daring escape. Well, that thing is an exogorth. They live for a very, very, very long time, and I've looked online, there's no explicit confirmation that the thing in this is an exogorth, but it looks quite close. Someone calls it a space slug, so I'm going to say it's basically the same thing. Poe is following this ship around this asteroid field, he makes communication with them, and then they actually help him survive while there's loads of stuff going on. There's, asteroids, and they give him some pointers. They're then attacked by some proximity mines, which try and attach themselves to the ship, and they use this special maneuver to get out of it, and this other ship tells Poe to do this maneuver, and it seems to be the same maneuver that he uses in The Last Jedi right at the start. When he does, basically he goes full speed at something, and then he changes thrusters and turns them off at the right second as he spins, and he basically does like a drift almost. That's kind of what it's like. So they manage to escape these mines, they don't hit any asteroids, they don't get eaten by any giant worms, and so they get out the side of the asteroid field and survive, and then this mystery ship shoots Poe's engines out and say, look, you're going to be fine here, your people are going to come and get you, but we need this stuff. Poe is trying to work out why they need these things, and then the person on the other end has been confirmed to be Amilyn Holdo, and the person who's flying the ship is Nine Nunb. And Nine Nunb is a Celestian, and he is the co-pilot of the Millennium Falcon with Lando in Return of the Jedi. Megan doesn't like him much because his mouth is really weirdly wet, but he looks like a kind of monkey-ish thing. He's got really big eyes and a weird wet mouth, but that's what Celestians look like, and Nine Nunb is a really cool character, and he does appear in other Star Wars content and whatnot as well. But yeah, he's the pilot, and Holdo calls him one of the best pilots in the galaxy, and she mentions basically, we need this data because there's certain stuff going on in the New Republic that is a bit suspect. And she mentions, the Resistance and says about, maybe consider joining that, and then leaves Poe. Now, for clarity, Holdo doesn't announce herself to Poe as being Holdo. It's just the last panel, you see it is her, and she speaks to Nine Nunb by name. And that's where that comic ends. As I said, once again, these comics, there's not a lot of meat to them. I'm just kind of using them as an excuse to give you guys bio information on a lot of these characters from the sequel trilogy. So the next character to tackle is going to be Rose Tico. So Rose was born 11 ABY. Much like Finn was, she is 23 years old, around the time of The Force Awakens. She's born on a planet called Hayes Minor, and in The Last Jedi, her necklace thing, which she tries to give to DJ, which is the guy played by Benicio del Toro, he mentions, that's Hassian's Melt, and Hassian's Melt, that is from Hayes Minor. Hassian, Hayes, there you go. She is in the book Cobalt Squadron, which is, once again, one of those run-up books to The Last Jedi and things, and it gives her a bit more information about her time in the Resistance and whatnot. But this is, once again, one of those, like a trailer almost for that sort of thing. And this story is called My Hero. It's not exactly clear when it takes place because the first part of the comic is Rose when she's a kid. She looks to be about 8 or 10 years old. And then it seems to take place several years later. So it's not explicitly clear what the time frame is. So her story is called My Hero, and here's the crawl. Young sisters Rose and Paige Tico are inseparable. And growing up in an era of hope and peace, the time of the glorious New Republic, means that their futures are as bright and boundless as the stars of the galaxy. But a war is coming, and new heroes will need to rise to defend the galaxy once more. So this whole comic has got a narration by it, talking about, my sister's a hero, my sister's great, my sister's that sort of thing. And it's got Rose and her sister Paige. For clarity, you do see Paige. She's the one at the start of The Last Jedi who manages to sacrifice herself to do that last bomb onto the First Order Dreadnought, which, Poe sees as a victory, but then causes all the events of The Last Jedi and whatnot. But yeah, that's her sister. They do mention it in things, and you see her sister holding the same necklace that she's got, and this necklace does show up in the comic as well, and it's like a half crescent sort of thing. So it shows that these sisters, Rose knows a lot about the technical readouts and things, while Paige knows how to fly. They're flying in space, they shoot a bit of debris, and this is while they're kids. Rose then takes over and then crashes the ship. Then it turns out that it's all just a simulation and they're at home with their parents. They talk about Hayes Minor, there's little atmosphere on there, and there's not really much there at all on the planet. It's just a quiet, untouched little place. The parents say to them that, you will always have the sky, there's not much on this planet, but you'll always have the sky to see because it's beautiful and there's not much pollution and that sort of thing. And then the comic changes and says years later, the First Order arrives. The First Order uses converted bombers to mine, and these converted bombers, I think intentionally, they look exactly the same as the bombers in The Last Jedi. They're quite vertical, weirdly enough, but they use those to mine. They shoot these beams out of the bottom of the ship. They're stripping the planet, they're mining it for resources, and they're polluting the atmosphere with loads of gas and dust and fog and things. And so Rose and Paige decide to fight back. They sneak into a nearby base, they manage to sabotage 12 bombers, which explode, and then 3 days later, the First Order are doing exactly what they were doing before, and the bombers are back. Rose and Paige's parents pay for them both to get passage off of planet to go and join with the Resistance. It shows some montages of Paige and Rose, fighting with the Resistance, dealing blow after blow to the First Order, and then they get a message to be told that Hayes Minor was actually blockaded, and that the planet basically got ripped apart, and it's unbreathable, you can't really go on the planet anymore, and essentially everyone on there is dead, which is confirming their parents died. So Paige and Rose decide to get on their ship and just go and attack the First Order, and before they go, they get stopped by Leia. I just want to read what Leia says because it's quite good, and Leia from the sequel trilogy is probably one of my favourite characters in all of Star Wars. She's just amazing. I do like Leia from the original trilogy, but I just think she's so wise in the sequel trilogy, it's amazing. So I'm just going to read exactly what she says. So it starts with Paige saying to Leia, "I just want to make them pay." And Leia says, "Of course you do. I understand, maybe better than anyone. I know what it is like to lose a world. Everything you knew, everyone you loved. You can lash out, you can be a bit of cathartic destruction, but it won't make a lasting difference, and you won't be coming back. You need to ask yourselves, do you want to throw a tantrum, or do you want to make real change? Do you want to be a minor inconvenience to the First Order, or do you want to be a constant frustrating pain in their side?" And Rose says, "That one." And Leia says, "Good, because there have been enough young lives lost to anger, and I've lived long enough to make a lot of evil people very miserable, and I certainly recommend it." And then the comic ends with Paige and Rose deciding they're not going to go on a suicide mission to deal some damage to the First Order. They are instead going to follow what Leia said and try and be the permanent pain in the side of the First Order, so they stay with the Resistance to try and make change in the galaxy. And yeah, that's where that comic ends. So once again, pretty standard, but obviously anything with Leia in it is really cool. So moving on to the next one, which is Rey. So let's give some information about Rey. She was born 15 years after the Battle of Yavin, so that was about 11 years after Return of the Jedi. So that means that she's about 19 years old in The Force Awakens and around 20 in The Rise of Skywalker. She lived in a downed AT-AT, which was from the Battle of Jakku, and she is in lots of sequel-era content, a lot of Forces of Destiny animations and whatnot. And now I'm about to say her surname is technically a spoiler for The Rise of Skywalker, and if you've seen it, you know what her surname is and then what it becomes, and I'll leave it at that just in case people haven't seen it, but you probably should if you're listening to this podcast. Go watch it. I have my own opinions on the film, but it's still definitely worth a watch. It's an enjoyable film, even though there are elements of it that are flawed. But let's move on then. So aside from that, there's not a huge amount about Rey, unless I just go over exactly what is said in The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, which I'm not going to do. So let's get on with her story then. It is called Alone. And here is the crawl. Orphaned on the desert planet Jakku, Rey has lived her whole life alone. That is, until she joined the Resistance, a band of intergalactic freedom fighters who defend the galaxy from the villainous First Order. Now, she may be the Resistance' last hope as she works towards strengthening her connection to the Force. So this comic starts with probably my favourite moment in the entirety of all of these comics, which is Leia and Chewie having a nice long hug. Now, one of the criticisms of The Force Awakens is that when Han Solo is killed, Rey and Chewie walk off the Falcon, and Chewie walks straight past Leia, and Leia hugs Rey, a person who she barely knows at all, and someone who doesn't really know Han Solo that well. Well, they have their own nice little hug. It just takes place after everything, and Leia says about the hug was a very long hug because you just have to wait for the Wookiee to be done with it. And she was crying while she was hugging Chewie and was saying, "Come on now, it's time to get off. I don't want to get your fur too wet." So it was just a really nice moment, and Leia's in this comic a fair amount, so obviously, as I said in the last one, I really like old Leia. I think she's amazing. So if you haven't already picked it up, this is set just before the end of The Force Awakens. So on the last scene of The Force Awakens, you see Rey get to Ahch-To where Luke is and then reach out holding the lightsaber, and that's where the film ends. Just before that, she does land back at the Resistance base. She talks to Leia. She hugs Leia, and then, it cuts, and then you've got Chewie and Rey flying off in the Falcon. So this is between those two times of her landing the Falcon and flying it off again, and Rey is having a conversation with Leia. So Leia asks Rey to recount Han's death for her, and it's got some panels just of that, and they speak about it. And then Leia and Rey discuss hope. They speak about, Rey is finding it hard to stay hopeful and things, and obviously where Leia's now had Han killed, and her son is turned to the dark side, and all the other things that have happened to her, losing Alderaan. She just says, look, you have to just keep on going, be hopeful in these sort of ways. And also Leia comments that it's helpful being good with a blaster as well, because, it helps her get out of a lot of situations. And Leia and Rey's conversation ends with Leia saying to Rey, look, you are not alone anymore, Rey. You're part of something bigger, and everything you do and everywhere you go, you will have the hope of the galaxy with you, which is really nice. And just as the Falcon sort of flies away from the Resistance base, Leia and Poe have a very short conversation, and Poe says she'd better find Luke. He may be our only hope. And Leia says, no, I believe there is another. And I love that line because it's so clever, because when Yoda says, no, there is another, in Empire Strikes Back, after Luke, bails on his training and leaves early, he is obviously speaking about Leia because she is Force sensitive and she's the other daughter of Anakin Skywalker. And obviously Leia then saying it about Rey instead of saying it about Luke, it just works really well. I like that sort of parallels, and it's clever, it's a little bit on the nose, but I like that sort of thing, it makes me smile. So the rest of this story takes place basically with just Rey and Chewie. So they're in hyperspace and then their systems overload. R2 is making a lot of noise and Rey, she says, who programmed you with attitude? Which is just brilliant, because R2-D2 has a lot of attitude for a droid. He has some of the best personality in all of Star Wars. I love R2. And so, as I said, the Falcon is damaged, the systems are overloading, so Rey mentions that they will get pulled apart if they don't stop. So they get out of hyperspace and they head to a nearby place, which is called Necropolis, to scavenge for parts. They meet this big bug creature thing called Aranea, and they say that they need to get a scavenging license, which costs 500 credits. They begrudgingly pay that, and then he's told that Rey has to go and scavenge alone, and they're going to keep Chewie in the ship and whatnot up here, just so she doesn't, fly off on something that's better. So she goes to scavenge, and she says, there's so many ships here, there's loads of them from all kinds of different eras, and she manages to find the part that she wants, and then this giant worm thing flies out and attacks her. Rey manages to run away and escapes and gets into a ship and flies away and goes back to Aranea. Now, the ship that she gets into is actually the Firespray 31 Class Patrol and Attack class, which is very much a mouthful, but you guys will probably recognise it as it's the same make of ship as the Slave One, which is Jango and Boba Fett's ship. But the Slave One is a modified version of the Firespray. But yeah, she flies on one of those, which I think is cool. I don't know if that was meant to kind of look like Boba or Jango's ship, but the colour-wise, it doesn't look the same. I think it was just meant to be, the same type of ship, and it's quite a cool little nod. So I just thought I'd say, yeah, if you want to be clever and show off to your friends to prove to them you know what the Slave One is, it's a Firespray 31 Class Patrol and Attack class, which, yeah, is definitely not a mouthful at all. So as I said, Rey gets to where Aranea is again, jumps out the ship, and then confronts them. It's confirmed that Aranea sprung a trap, which is what caused the ship to fail in the first place, and says that this is what all these ships are here for, aren't they? You basically trap all these people, and then you get them sent down there, they get killed by those giant worm things, and then you get all their stuff. And then she sees there's lots of little people who are around. They kind of look a little bit like Jawas, but they don't look exactly the same as Jawas, so I'm not entirely sure. But she asks them if they're slaves, they just give her a sad look, and then she confronts Aranea. Aranea then gets quite aggressive, gets into a stance and starts yelling at her. Rey pulls out a lightsaber, but then tries to use the Force to mind trick Aranea. And it works, and she mind tricks Aranea into surrendering to their own slaves so that the slaves will then be free and Aranea will get put in prison. And then the comic ends with Rey and Chewie getting into the Falcon, fixing everything up, and then heading over to Ahch-To. And yeah, it's just a nice little story. I quite like this one because of Leia being in it and stuff, as I keep saying. I don't think I can say it any more times. Do you guys know that I really like Leia in the sequel trilogy? But yeah, that's where that comic ends. So the next batch of stories are all from the Age of Resistance special. So this is 3 mini stories within there. They're each about 10 pages long or so. So the first story is called Maz's Scoundrels, and it's starring Maz Kanata. The writer for this is Tom Taylor, just like the other stories. The artist is Matteo Buffagni, and the colour artist is Chris Eliopoulos. Now, Maz is quite an interesting character. She is the little orange woman who appears in the sequel trilogy. She's most prominent in The Force Awakens when Han takes Rey to Maz Kanata's castle on Takodana. Maz was born 973 years before the Battle of Yavin, so around the time of The Force Awakens, she's approximately 1,007 years old, which is mental. I presume they're probably going to change that somewhat, because Han does make a comment on the fact that Maz has had this watering hole for 1,000 years. Now, he might just be, over-exaggerating and whatnot. I think you can maybe stretch that to say, if she was like 60 years old when she started it, you can maybe give a bit of give, because then it would be, 940 odd years prior, which, Ham would probably just round that up just for ease. But equally, if she is currently around 1,000 years old and she seems to have the sort of energy and wisdom and whatnot of probably like a 60 or 70-year-old woman, then it's kind of interesting, like, would she age in the same way that Yoda's species would age? Because her species isn't named anywhere either. So I wonder if she could be maybe a similar species to Yoda. I mean, there is already a female version of Yoda species who's called Yaddle, and you can see Yaddle in The Phantom Menace, sat on the Jedi Council sort of chairs. Yaddle has just hair. That's the main difference between her and Yoda, but Yaddle doesn't really appear much else in canon. But yeah, it's interesting because in The Mandalorian, the child, whose name is Grogu, which everyone nicknames Baby Yoda before you know what his name was, he's like 50 years old, and he acts like, probably a 3 to 5 year old. So it's kind of almost like the age of Yoda species is almost like 10 times less in a sense. So like their 50-year-olds are like our 5-year-olds, that kind of thing. So I wonder if that Maz Kanata's species is like that as well. I don't know. None of us have the answers yet. Hopefully one day we will. But her homeworld is apparently Takodana as well, and she is in lots of books. She's in The Last Shot, Force Collector, Aftermath Life Debt, and she also narrates the starting to the Forces of Destiny miniseries, which is the animated series aimed for really, really young kids. It's on YouTube. It's also on Disney Plus. Each episode is listed to be like 5 or 6 minutes long, but with credits, it's actually like three minutes long. There's a few alright ones in there. I've watched quite a few of them, but there's not that many that are phenomenal. But, I'm getting sidetracked with the Forces of Destiny. So let's get into this story. So as I said earlier, each story is about 10 pages long, so it's really not that much at all, especially when I'm giving you guys the sort of the smaller details. But I think Mars's might be my favourite of these 3 mini ones, but whatever. So this one seems to take place anywhere between 4 years before the Battle of Yavin and 7 years after the Battle of Yavin. So it's basically anywhere between 4 years before A New Hope and 3 years after Return of the Jedi. It could have happened any time in that 11-year period, so who knows? Maz hires Han and Chewie to get something back from this Baron guy. They go to an ice planet, they attack a castle, or Han and Chewie attack the castle while Maz sneaks in. The Han's basically being the distraction, and then Chewie notes something is off, he smells something, and then leaves Han to it. It goes to where Maz is in the sort of throne room talking to the Baron, and the Baron is wearing a Wookiee pelt. Maz makes a comment on that and says, you won't be too happy wearing that when he shows up, and they're like, well, it doesn't matter, I'm not backing down or anything. And then Chewie roars, kicks down a door, and then Maz sits on his shoulders, and they've got blasters, and they like shoot in a circle, just gunning down everyone. It is pretty impressive. It manages to all work out, and then Han is like, well, why did you want to come here so much? What was this thing that this Baron had that has caused so much trouble? And Maz pays Han a little bit extra, and then she shows him, and it is actually a helmet. Now, this specific helmet is a special adjutant helmet. Now, if that doesn't sound familiar to you guys, it did not sound familiar to me at all, so I looked it up, and it actually seems to be the same helmet that the Grand Inquisitor wore in Star Wars Rebels. Now, in the first season of Star Wars Rebels, there is a main antagonist who's the Grand Inquisitor. He used to be a Jedi Temple guard. I believe he's from Utapau. He turned to the dark side when Order 66 and all that sort of jazz happened. It seems like he may have turned a little bit earlier than that because he wanted to access all of the Jedi's forbidden knowledge and they wouldn't let him. And an Inquisitor, in brief, it's basically someone who's force sensitive that was captured by Darth Vader, Palpatine, the Empire, and then either asked nicely to be a dark side user or more likely tortured and put through loads of horrendous stuff to make them an Inquisitor. That means people's limbs got cut off and replaced by cybernetics, people been tortured till they lose their minds, all kinds of nasty things. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order goes into it a little bit, and Star Wars Rebels also goes into it as well, but the Grand Inquisitor is specifically from Star Wars Rebels Season 1, and this appears to be the helmet that he wore when he was flying his TIE Fighter, which I think is just a nice little connection there. And Maz specifically says that every artifact that is imbued with the dark side that we take back means there's a little more light in the galaxy. Which is a really nice thing to say. I don't really understand how that could be the case, that if one Darkseid user, like Palpatine, accumulates all Darkseid stuff, how that would diminish the light. I would have assumed that having Darkseid stuff spread out across the galaxy would diminish the light more so, and I don't know how a light side user owning Darkseid stuff prevents the light from coming out. I don't know. But it's a nice way to end it. Nice little nod. And obviously Maz Kanata is amazing. And any more content with her is always welcomed. So let's move on to the second story of this special. And this is all about Amilyn Holdo. And the story is called The Bridge. The writer of the story is G. Willow Wilson, the artist is Elsa Charretier, and the colour artist is Nick Filardi. Let's give a bit of information about Holdo. Now, she was played by Laura Dern in The Last Jedi. She famously did the Holdo maneuver, which is probably the best scene in all of The Last Jedi, which is when she turns the ship into the fleet of the First Order, activates hyperspace, and then it's just that beautifully shot scene where there's no sound for a moment and you just watch the ship collide through all of that debris and whatnot. And I want to clarify here, some people have said before, like, oh, why do the rebellion not just, or the resistance, why do they not just use those same tactics again? Why can't you just keep doing the Holdo maneuver, get a ship, use hyperspace, fly through some other ships, done. That'll probably do a lot more damage. Well, the reason is because that doesn't necessarily always work. In fact, it's very, very rare for it to work. But the ship that she's flying is the Raddus. Now, the Raddus, you may recognize that name because that is the Mon Calamari Blue Admiral from Rogue One. So same species as Admiral Akbar. He is the one in Rogue One, and they name a ship after him because of his sacrifice when he goes to the Battle of Scarif. Now, the Raddus ship itself is a Mon Cala ship, and Mon Cala ships have very, very good shielding on them, which is why they're so important to the Rebellion fleet and to the then Resistance fleet. Now, the Raddus also had experimental shields, so they had some certain shields that were way better than any other shields, seemingly, of the fleet, and due to that and a few other kind of just happened to be in place things, kind of by chance almost, she just pulled that maneuver off and it did what it did. Chances are if you tried to do that maneuver another 10, 15, 20 times, it wouldn't always work the same way. So that's one sort of vague plot hole filled. But for more information on Holdo, her home planet is Gatalenta. She is friends with Princess Leia when Leia is about 16 years old. It is all detailed in the book Leia, Princess of Alderaan, which is by Claudia Gray. In my interview with Claudia Gray, which was released around December 2020, I actually speak to her about that book because it is a surprisingly brilliant book. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it that much because it was the last one of Claudia Gray's I bought. It is actually really, really good. And Holdo as a child, or as a teenager, is very much like Luna Lovegood from Harry Potter. And Luna Lovegood is my favourite character in Harry Potter, so that works out well as well. So she was basically training to become an apprentice senator or minister and around the same age as Leia. So I think she's around the same age as Leia in general. So that's about enough information without just, as I said, recounting everything that happens in that book. So let's get on with the story. And just for clarity, Holdo's story again is called The Bridge, and the crawl for that is, flying with the heroic Rebel Alliance might give the young minister Amilyn Holdo the chance she needs to prove all that she is capable of. And it starts on the ship, the Candor. Now, the Candor is a CR-90 corvette, it's also called a Corellian corvette, and it's also called a blockade runner, but you guys will know it best because it is now I'm going to pronounce it in two ways because this is like the whole GIF conversation in our world, Tantive 4 or Tantive 4. Now, there's certain people who say it's Tantive, there's other people who say it's Tantive, some people pronounce it as Tantive, but it's basically the ship right at the start of A New Hope, and it's also right at the end of Rogue One. It's, it's a very iconic ship. It's the first Rebellion ship you see is when Darth Vader gets on there and chases down and captures Leia, etc., etc. That ship is a CR-90 corvette, and the main one that we recognise is the Tantive 4 or the Tantive 4, however you want to word it. But she's in one of those ships, and it's called the Candor. Holdo is dyeing her hair with the plants. These plants aren't mentioned anywhere else, but they look a little bit like Venus flytraps. Now, there's some people who kind of walk past her as they're kind of hearing these crazy noises from these Venus flytrap plants that she's grabbing and kind of, I want to say milking, but they've got like an extract in them that she uses to dye her hair. People seem to think that she's just, a bit useless. The term someone uses is she's just there as decorative, so downplaying how important she is. The ship they're on gets attacked by an Imperial Star Destroyer, showing obviously it's at the age of rebellion sort of time, and the captain is killed in the attack because some controls and whatnot blow up, and the captain dies. Holdo then takes charge because she's the next in command, and she asks about the ion drive. They say the ion drive seems to be fine, and then the ship gets grabbed by the Star Destroyer's tractor beam. As they're being pulled into the tractor beam and into the hangar of the Star Destroyer, Holdo says to use their ion drive. So they aim the ship directly at the cargo bay, so they're basically facing where the tractor beam is pulling them in, and then she tells them to shoot into the cargo hold with all of their power. So this ion drive, ion stuff in Star Wars is basically good for armor-piercing vehicles and is good for destroying droids as well from the Clone Wars and whatnot. So it's what a lot of ships use because it helps pierce shields a lot more and also pierces armor and whatnot when they're electronic and etc. But without delving into a whole thing about ion stuff, shooting holes into the cargo bay, and what they managed to do is shoot a hole through the Star Destroyer. You see from the Star Destroyer where the ship is at the bottom shooting, explosions are happening at the top, and they managed to fly the ship straight through the Star Destroyer in the hole that they made, and then when they get out the other side, they then use hyperspace and get out of there. It's quite a cool story, actually, and it just shows that Holdo is, like, strategically very clever and very good at thinking on her feet, and that you shouldn't underestimate her in any way. And as I said, if you're interested by that character, I really, really recommend reading Leia, Princess of Alderaan. It's a very interesting book set when Leia's 16, so it's about 3 years before A New Hope, and it's her finding out that her parents, Bail and Breha Organa, are in the rebellion. And it's just interesting having a teenager kind of come to that realization and that sort of stuff. So really recommend that book. So yeah, this story, it basically ends with they escape, and then Holdo is speaking on the comms to someone else, and then this other person says, Leia was right about you. She said you were, doing great things, etc., etc. And then that's where that story ends. So this means we are on to the final story, guys, and it is featuring the main droid of the sequel trilogy, BB-8. So this story is called Robot Resistance. The writer is Chris Eliopoulos, the artist is Javier Pina, and the colour artist is Guru EFX. So some background information on BB-8. He was manufactured, I say he because just to clarify, droids have gender personalities, I think they're called, whereas essentially it's more aligned with one gender than the other. So C-3PO, R2-D2 and BB-8 all have the male personality types, whereas our other droids, there's one in Star Wars Resistance actually, I think it's BD-23, something along those lines, and that's a red BB unit, and that has the female personality to it. So yeah, they do have those. But yeah, BB-8, he was manufactured on 29 ABY, so it's around 5 years before The Force Awakens. So, by the end of the sequel trilogy, he's 6 years old, which makes him a little babby. And he's Poe's droid, but he's with a character who's the main character in Star Wars Resistance called Kazuda, and he's there for the first season of Resistance, and then he gets swapped out for this, I think it's actually CB-29, and he gets swapped out with that. And obviously, because the end of Star Wars Resistance ends with the events of The Force Awakens, and obviously BB-8 has to be with Poe for that sort of thing. So yeah, he's with Poe pretty much all the time, except at the first series of Star Wars Resistance where he's not, and then he's back with Poe again. Another little fun thing about BB-8 is there are actually 7 different units used during the filming of The Force Awakens for BB-8. So there was one that they used when he was rolling on the floor. There's one that people used when they had to carry him. Lots of different ones. It's quite cool seeing the behind the scenes stuff. And also his voice was actually done by 2 people who are credited as vocal consultants. Now, these 2 people are actors. There's Bill Hader, who's famous for Saturday Night Live. He's in Superbad. He's in Barry. He's in loads of stuff. If you don't know who Bill Hader is, look him up, you'll recognize him. And the other guy is a guy called Ben Schwartz. Now, Ben Schwartz is probably most famous for the most recent 3 things he's been in was Space Force with Steve Carell. He voiced Sonic the Hedgehog in the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, and my favourite character that he does is John Ralphio in Parks and Recreation. So John Ralphio from Parks and Recreation, he voices and contributes to the voice of BB-8 along with Bill Hader. They basically did loads of weird noises and stuff that got sort of changed in post-production to make it sound quite droidy, but that's just a fun little tidbit about BB-8. So as I said, BB-8's story is called Robot Resistance, and the crawl is: infiltrating the First Order has become second nature to Poe Dameron, but controlling BB-8 could be a mission that nobody is prepared for. So the narrative of this story. Poe sends BB-8 into a First Order base to download some troop movements and to just immediately get out. He tells him to be discreet, and Poe is just waiting quite far back with binoculars essentially. And he also says that BB-8 is always getting into trouble, and then surprise, surprise, that's what happens in this story. As BB-8 is trying to find a terminal to be able to, download the data and whatnot, he sees a bunch of droids being tortured by a single First Order trooper, and they're being tortured to try and make them more compliant. Poe is speaking to BB-8 over the comms and is telling him to just ignore them and just look, get the data first, then we can come back and help those people. But BB-8 completely ignores Poe Dameron and then shocks the trooper with one of his many things in his utility belt, and the trooper passes out and he saves the droids. BB-8 then enters a terminal that's nearby to get all that data. Just before he's finished downloading all the data, 2 stormtroopers come up and find him and put a restraining bolt on him. Poe starts to freak out when he hears what's going on, and then he tries to get closer and closer, and then over the comms he hears this very strange noise. It turns out that the droid that BB-8 saved BB-8 in return, and then the droids run amok. While they're escaping the First Order base, they're shocking troopers everywhere, they're setting off explosives, and it's just mental. The droids manage to escape, and the base explodes. Poe takes BB and the droids back to Leia at the Resistance base, and Leia welcomes them into the Robot Resistance. And that's the end of the story. As I said, not very many pages. It's quite a visual story, because obviously the main character is a droid who can't speak Basic, which is English in air quotes. And yeah, it's a fun little story. It just shows, BB-8 caring about droids. It evidences further that, the Rebel Alliance and the Republic allegedly, and also the Resistance all take care of droids and they're nice people and things, while the Empire and the First Order are horrible to droids and therefore they don't get any loyalty. Obviously, this thing of rebelling from the droids is quite a common theme in Star Wars, especially recently. The biggest one being L337 in Solo, doing that whole rebellion. She's a brilliant character in Solo. I was upset to see her go. But yeah, it's quite a cool thing. I'm hoping they're going to do some sort of movie or something about some sort of robot uprising. I would be surprised if Taika Waititi's film is going to have some sort of element of that, because he is very much a comedy director. And what he did with Thor Ragnarok, I could see him doing that with Star Wars, but having loads of kooky and weird droids and stuff. But we will have to see about that, because that's not going to be out for another couple of years. But yeah, guys, that is the end of all of the Age of Resistance stories that are one-shots and the Age of Resistance special. And that means I have tackled every single Star Wars one-shot comic, including all of the Age of series, which there's the Age of Republic series, which are the prequels, the Age of Rebellion series, which was the original trilogy, and the Age of Resistance, which is the sequel trilogy. I really hope you guys have enjoyed all of these Age of things. If you haven't listened to the other ones, make sure you go back and listen to them. I believe in the description of this, I have put in the show notes, description, whatever you want to call it, I've just put a list of all of the Star Wars Comics and Canon episodes which have these in, and also shortly on YouTube I'll be putting in an Age of playlist, and I'll just be putting all of the Age of episodes in there as well. The Age of comics, some of them are within other episodes, like I did a whole episode all about Count Dooku, and it was just a big bio on his life. In that I included his Age of Republic story, and it was the same with Darth Maul as well. I think I tackled Darth Maul within the first few episodes, and in that I tackled his mini-series as well as the Age of comic that he features in too, and they both interlink, so that works well. But yeah, guys, that is it. So what have we got coming up? So next week should be the main run of Star Wars once again. I am following on from the Hope Dies arc, which was the last one I tackled. So this is going to be issues 56 to I think it's 61, I believe. That's the next arc. And we're getting near the end because I think there's about 75 issues of the main run of Star Wars comics where it ends. So we are getting near the end of the first run of Star Wars, the main run. Then the week after that, I'm going to be tackling the second part of the Canon miniseries. I say miniseries, it was 12 issues and I tackled 6 in the last episode that I did about Canon. So we'll see. So that'll be the second half of those. Then once I've done that, it will mean that I have tackled every Marvel Canon miniseries in the Star Wars comics, which is really cool. The week after that, I will be tackling the Dr. Aphra, the next batch of Dr. Aphra comics that I've got, and I'm not too far from the end of her stuff as well. So, and then the week after that, which will be 4 weeks from this one, I will be releasing, most likely me tackling the first run of the 2017 Darth Vader run by Charles Soule. So quite excited about that. And then I'm going to figure out what I'll be doing in like 2 weeks after that, because what I was doing is main run of Star Wars, mini-series, main run of Aphra, one-shots, main run of Star Wars, etc. Just kind of goes like that. So now I've caught up with them. There's quite a few ongoing series to tackle. Obviously, there's the Darth Vader 2017 series. There's the Poe Dameron comics, which I haven't yet tackled, which will probably be the next thing on the list. There's a couple of IDW comics that I want to tackle. The Tales of Vader's Castle, which are written by Cavan Scott. I'm going to tackle them at some point in the future. And then I've also got all of the series that are going on right at the moment, which are the High Republic comics, the High Republic Adventures comics, Bounty Hunters, second run of Star Wars comics, second run run of Afra comics, third run of Vader comics, and then also we've got the War of the Bounty Hunters, big crossover stuff that is happening, and that is happening between, I think, it started now, so May, and I think it runs through to like October time, where it's all 4 of the main series that are in present day, which is Bounty Hunter, Star Wars, Afra, and Vader, all of those linking in along with a mini-series of the War of the Bounty Hunters comics, as well as one-shots about Jabba the Hutt, Forlom and Zuckuss, Boosh and IG-88, as well as a War of the Bounty Hunters Alpha comic as well. Loads of connections and things all about, bounty hunters basically fighting over Han Solo's carbonated, I don't have to call it a corpse, but him in carbonite, that's what this whole thing is about, because obviously the bounty for Han Solo by Jabba is incredibly large. So that is, I'll be tackling them at some point. I think that basically I'm going to keep doing all of the series that are finished, get all of those finished and out of the way, and then I'll start to tackle some of the newer ones. And then probably in about 6 months' time, maybe a year, I will be up to date with all of the ongoing Star Wars comics. So that's something to look forward to. I also should be speaking with a gentleman. When this episode comes out, I should be in the midst of speaking with him. So I'm currently recording this on a Friday afternoon, and I should be speaking with him tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. And he is a gentleman who had his hands in the Star Wars Return of the Jedi quite heavily, as well as Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. So that's a little hint for you guys. He is a puppet master, and he actually created the creature Salacious Crumb, which is the Kowakian monkey lizard, the weird little cackling thing that you see in Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. I haven't fully decided if I'm going to release that on this feed or not. It will definitely be on Genuine Chit-Chat over the next month or two. It just depends how much we actually speak about Star Wars. Will depend on whether or not I put it on this feed, because I don't want this just to be my second Genuine Chit-Chat feed. But I like to put it on there just so you guys who aren't subscribed to Genuine Chit-Chat don't miss out on any of my conversations with people involved with Star Wars. I have got more in the pipeline as well, and I'm very excited for this one to come out. Next week's episode of Star Wars Comics in Canon, after I've got the recording in the bag, I will be able to confirm the gentleman that I will have then spoken to. I'll be able to confirm his name. Aside from that, guys, in the description I've got links to some of the other podcasts that I've guested on recently, and also, as I like to always say at the end here, I have got a Patreon. My Patreon is patreon.com/genuinechitchat. If you contribute as little as £1 a month, which I think is around $1.50, $1.30, if you contribute that small amount of money to me a month, which would mean the absolute world to me, you get access to photos that I put on social media for the Star Wars Comics in Canon show, so these ones. I normally put them on Patreon on Thursday, so you get a bit of a warning of those. I also upload a series that me and my girlfriend Megan do. It is called Afterthoughts. We release 2 episodes a week-ish, and we talk about series and movies that we watched. It's basically a movie TV like show, except instead of the episodes being like an hour long, they're between 10 and 20 minutes, and we just vaguely talk about them. There's certain ones to talk about details, but also if you go there now, patreon.com/genuinechitchat, you can listen to our review of Star Wars The Phantom Menace and Season 1 of The Witcher completely for free, which is there about 40 or so minutes of completely free content. And I will be releasing a little bit more content for free soon, but you don't get anywhere near the amount of content you would if you just contribute the £1 or $1.30, whatever it is, a month. That amount of money to you guys, I know it means a lot to some people, and to me, it means the absolute world. If you donate even that tiny amount, you get access to a feed link, and you can just pop that feed link wherever you listen to your podcasts, and then you'll get early access to episodes of Genuine Chit-Chat, and then you also get the Afterthoughts episodes as well, and anything else I managed to get out early. So it's worth looking at. Even if you don't contribute, you still get stuff for free by listening to those episodes. But if you want to try and help the show, but you don't want to contribute financially, that is 100% okay. Just try and review Comics in Motion and or Genuine Chit-Chat wherever you listen to your podcasts. Share some of my episodes either with your friends or on social media. Any of those things really helps out the Comics in Motion network and also me as a person, because I have a fragile ego, and if someone doesn't tell me a compliment every few hours, I cry. I don't really do that. That was a joke. But thank you so much for listening, guys. I really appreciate each and every one of you listening, especially all the way up to the end through my rambling nonsense. And I extra love any of you who are subscribers on my Patreon. It does mean the absolute world to me. Anyway, guys, I will speak to you next week. I'll have more information on the mysterious puppeteer guest that I'm having on the show. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys next Saturday. And as always, may the Force be with you.